All right. So up until this point, with working with Django CRUD apps and nested CRUD and all that, our apps have been relatively like, I don't want to say boring, but there hasn't been any sexiness to them. There's no pizzazz. It's just like, all right, I can read from a database, I can write from a database, I can just edit, delete, etc. And we've just been doing that on repeat for the past week and a half or so. But today we're going to make our apps a little more sexy, give it a little more pizzazz, and just make it a little more dynamic and just kind of more fun, I would say. So with that, does anybody know what an API is, or a third-party API is?
It's like the interface that you can use to like reach into someone else's program and grab stuff. You have like a defined way of like asking, and they have a defined way of returning.
Exactly. Exactly. So if you think about it, an API or in the real world, there's certain things that like we can do on our own, and there's certain things that we pay other people to do for us. For example, my car just got something in the mail with regards to our car that's like the AC condenser is messed up, or there's like a warranty on it. I can like spend thousands of hours, a bunch of money, and learn how to replace like an AC condenser. Just learn how the inner workings of a car, and they'll know how to replace all that. Or I can just take it down to my local dealership or local mechanic shop and pay them to do it, because they spent all the money, all the hours learning their skill, and they can do in infrastructure to essentially fix my car for me, and I pay them for it. The same thing goes with software. So there's certain services that other companies have built out and created that we can pay them to have access to. So if we think about, let's just think about if we're going to build an application from scratch, and it's raining here in Chicago right now, and say I wanted to build a mobile app that on the press of a button, somebody comes and brings me an umbrella so I don't get wet out. What would I need to build that? Just start throwing stuff out. What would I need?
You would need some kind of like weather data. You would need like locations, like some way to link up, and like an interface.
Some kind of payment form.
All right. Weather, payment form. So like credit card processing. Okay, great. Anybody else?
I was social geo. Yeah, I was just about to say that geo, like location or something. Like
location data, maybe some mapping data, right? So think about, all right, I can build out a weather system by myself. I'd have to, build out a Doppler radar to get weather information. I don't know anything about that. So I'd have to learn that skill, all the engineering to build out a Doppler radar, being able to read from that just so I can get that weather data on my maps or in my application so I know when it's raining. Or, I can go to a company that's already done that, like weather.com or Dark Sky, that already has all that data like for me, and I can tap into that and I can read that data. Same thing with, mapping data. I can send satellites into the sky to take photos of maps, or have somebody drive around and create maps from scratch, and I can somehow read that data, like obviously, or I can just plug into, Google Maps API and just get mapping data pretty easy. Or same thing with credit card processing. That's like the worst, because there's so much regulation with regards to holding credit card information, especially like in databases. So it's not even like worth trying to build out that infrastructure and all that, just being responsible for that, like all the insurance you probably have to have, just saying you're storing, PCI, to be able PCI compliant. It's probably a lot of overhead for you. Or I can just tap into Stripe API, that they've done all that work for me. So I can build out this relatively sophisticated application with just plugging into different services by getting weather data, mapping data, credit card information for users to pay, etc. So any questions about third-party APIs and what they're kind of used for and why they're awesome?
So how much does that typically cost to use someone's API on average? And are there free APIs out there to use?
Yes. So good question. I'd say majority of the API, I don't want to say majority. It depends on what you want to do, but a lot of the APIs you'll be using are free unless you want to unless there's like some proprietary information like financial information. There's like APIs for that, but you have to pay for that. But most of them are free. Like the ones we're going to be using are free, or they have limits. So you have a certain limit, and once you cross over that threshold, then they start paying. Then you have to start paying per request. But most of them are free. So don't worry about having to pay for these third-party APIs. And if you have to pay for it, don't use it. There's probably a free alternative for it. Or what you're trying to do is really sophisticated and probably not worth doing during the program. Did that answer your question for you?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go ahead and get started. And we're going to be building out a relatively simple Django app that we're not going to use any database at all. So if I come over here, I'm just going to kind of show you. So yeah, API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's just a way, Jack said it better than I could. It's a way that we can interact with another system to get data from. So if you think about it, so we have like a Django application right here. This is my application. I make an API request to some outside service like Google Maps, Stripe, Venmo, weather.com. It's on their server, and then I get a response back. And then I can do something with that data. So we don't really need an actual server on our side, or I'm sorry, we don't need a database to store information technically to tap into an API. Questions? All right. So what I'm going to do is just build out CD desktop CP challenges. I'm going to make a directory called, what is that directory called? I'll just do make directory third party API. And in this lecture, we're going to be using the Google Maps embed API. It's really easy to use. Google has amazing documentation, and it's pretty much just plug and play. But it does require you to gain access to it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and create. Should I zoom in more? Is that better? I'm going to open this up into a new VS Code window. Reloads. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is make what's going on? What just happened? Make a virtual environment. So I'm going to just create a Django project, a Django app, just to get it up and running. And I'm going to display some addresses, just kind of but they are landmarks. So I'm just going to display some landmarks on the screen. So Python-make venv, source venv bin activate. So there we go. I'm in my virtual environment. And now I'm going to do Python dash, what am I doing? Pip install Django. And I'm not going to use a Postgres database just because it's not necessary for this. I'm just going to use the basic SQL database just to keep things light. All right. So I'm going to list everything out. I've got my virtual environment. Now I'm going to start a project called Landmarks. And this project is going to just display a bunch of landmarks as well as the map location of that landmark. So I'm going to do Django admin, start project, landmarks. And if I look over here, I've got my landmarks Django project. And then the app I'm going to build out is just going to be, I'm just going to call it map. So Python manage.py start app map. Oh, what did I call it? All right. So let's open up the Explorer and just kind of take a look at our landmarks Django project and our Django app called Map. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is import our Django app called Map. I'm just going to be using this built-in SQLite database for this one, just to keep things simple. I don't want to set up an actual Postgres database. All right. What questions do you have up until this point? Everyone should be pretty familiar with just starting a Django project, starting a Django app. All right. So I'm going to open up my Django models for my database. And this is where I'm just going to store some locations so I can map on the screen. So with that, I'm going to do class landmark. And this inherits from the models model. And this is just going to have two fields, a name and an address. And the address field, it's not going to be like address line 1, address line 2, which I'm just going to keep it simple. It's going to be address and just the entire address. So I'm going to say name, models, dot char field, max length. I'll just do 255. And the next one is address. And I'll also make that 255. I'm going to add a dunder string method just so it displays a little nice when I print out that landmark object. F string ID self.id. Self.name is located at self.address. So right here, this landmark object just has a name of it, such as, like Disney World, and the address of Disney World will just be right here. All right, just keep it simple. Just one model. That's it. So with that, I'm going to do Python manage.py, make migrations. I'm just going to do map. So I created my model landmark. And now I'm going to migrate that into my SQLite database.
Why did you put map at the end of make migrations?
Because I only wanted to migrate the map Django app. I didn't want to migrate all the built-in internal scripts, the migration scripts. It really doesn't matter. I could do it. I just did it so I could do that, and it'll run all these as well. That's the only reason. And notice how here, since I'm using SQLite, I've got this SQLite file, this db.sqlite3. This is what a SQLite database looks like. It's literally just a file that allows us to store things on and allows us to run SQL queries on. So it's totally okay if you're using it. You don't have to use a Postgres database specifically for all your projects, but yeah. Anyway, all right. So let's clear that. Clear our models. So next, let's go ahead and create a couple URLs. So inside my Django project called landmarks, I'm going to import the include from the Django URLs and create a new path to landmarks. And this is going to include the map.urls file as well. So I come into my Django app called map, and I'm going to create a urls.py file. And what do I need in here? I'm just going to copy this over and delete what I don't need. So I don't need the include. And I don't need that admin. I don't need that. So when I go to our views dot landmark list view method, I'm probably going to need a named route called landmark list. And I want it to just display a list of the landmarks that are in my database. So I can say from import views. All right. What questions do you have up until this point?
I still have trouble understanding why there's two urls.py.
So in our Django project, we have a URLs file. And this is where the entry point into our Django project will always look first, right in here. And then once we look into here, we can route it. Where else do we want to look? What app do we want to point it to? So when we come to the landmarks, we want it to point to the URLs file in the Django app.
Okay, so the project urls.py is like pointing to which app to use and not pointing to a website.
It's not, yeah, it's just pointing to a URL. Like, what do you want to happen when you go to admin, like /admin? All right. Look at these URLs. What happens when you go to /landmarks? Go look at the URLs in the map Django app. So yeah.
So it does get added to the URL?
Yes. Yes. So whenever you go to /admin or /landmarks, it'll come into here and run whatever view method is in here. What are you thinking about?
Just processing it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. So once we go into the view, or once we create go to /landmarks, comes into the map, the Django app map, and looks right here. Now we need to create a landmark list view method. So I'm going to open up my views. I'm going to do def landmark list. That just takes in the request, and I just want this to display all of the landmarks. Let's say landmarks, or I'll do all landmarks equals landmark dot objects dot all, and I'm going to have to import the landmark model. Landmark. Is that right? Oh. I always get that mixed up because it's the opposite in React. Import. So there we go. And now the landmark list is just going to return a render method that takes in the request, the map /landmark list.html file, which we haven't created yet. And we're going to pass in a dictionary of all the landmarks. All landmarks. All right. So with that, I'm in my map app. I'm going to create another directory called templates. Inside of there, I'm going to create another directory called map. And then inside of there, I'm going to create the landmark _ list.html file.
Is there a purpose to having that nested folder set up?
Just to keep things separate if we ever create this, if it gets bigger. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So in here,
the urls.py, the map one, you've got the views and then the name. What's the name used for?
So this is for routing. So what I'll show it to you in a second, but it's a named route. So instead of hard coding a URL in a link, I can just call this, and I'll add this named route into the link, and it'll know where to point me to. It'll know what URL to point me to. And I'll show you here in a second. So we've got my landmarks. Great. And let's see what else we need. Let's just run this and see if we can get to my landmarks to show up on the screen. So I can say Python manage.py, run server. Now I haven't put any, looks like something is already running. Clear, let's run that again. Cool. Now I don't have any landmarks in my database, but we'll go ahead and manually add a couple here in a second. So if I go to localhost 8000 /landmarks, I've got my landmarks right here. Oh, I don't want to save that. So now let's actually go ahead and create some landmarks and throw them into our database. And I'm going to do it from the Python shell. I do Python manage.py shell. All right, I'm going to have to say from map.models import, just say everything. Is that right? I'm going to create 3 models or 3 landmarks. I created landmark.objects.create. I created the name called the Bean, and the address to the Bean in Chicago is 201 East Randolph Street. So I've got that one. I'm going to also create landmark.objects.create. So create will automatically save it to the database. So Eiffel Tower, because I want to display the Eiffel Tower, like a map of it. And I'm just going to copy that address because it's very long. So I've got the Eiffel Tower in there. And the last one I'm going to create is the Golden Gate Bridge. So I created 3 landmarks in my database. And now I actually want to display them on the screen. So inside my landmark list, I'm grabbing all the landmarks from the database, and I want to render them all at the landmark list HTML file, and I'm passing them in as all landmarks. So Jinja 2, I can say for landmark and all landmarks. I'm going to do an N4. Just close that. I'm going to make an H2 tag and a landmark .name and make a P tag for landmark address. So I'm passing in all landmarks into the landmark list HTML. I'm looping through all the landmarks. So I'm grabbing each single landmark and I'm displaying landmark name and address in a P tag. So if I refresh that, nothing happened. Do I have to restart the server?
All landmarks?
I think it's supposed to be plural or singular.
Oh, that's why. Thank you. There we go. I've got 3 landmarks. Now what do I want to do? If I want to visit each individual landmark, what do we usually have here is like, if I click on it, it'll go to landmark, specific landmark ID, right? So what should we do? What's the next step? We've got a list of landmarks. Now we should create what?
Put some A tags in there.
Yep, let's make an A tag. A tag, href. I'm going to keep it like, I'm not going to make it route anywhere yet because I want to, there we go. So when I click on that, I want it to go to landmark 1, but I haven't done that yet. I haven't built out that URL yet. So let's go ahead back to our URLs. And we've got, what the hell? Now we can actually create a landmark ID. So path int, what the hell? Int landmark underscore ID.
I think you got to fix your int.
Yep, thank you. And I got to make that. I believe that's what it looks like. So when I go to landmarks/landmark ID, I want it to go to views, the landmark detail page. And that name of that should also be called landmark detail. Doesn't have to be, but it's just good practice to keep things named the same. So once it goes to here, I need to go into my views and create a landmark detail page or detail view. Detail takes in the request, landmark detail. And I can say landmark equals mark.objects.get ID equals landmark.
Would that argument be landmark detail or would it be landmark RD?
You are correct. It should be landmark ID. All right. So with that, I'm going to have to probably return render instead of landmark list. Let's do landmark detail. And instead of all landmarks, let's just pass in a single landmark, like so. Next, we can build out that landmark detail HTML file. And let's do H1. And I'm passing in that landmark right here. So I have access to the landmark.name. And let's do, let's make that a p tag. And have it to be the address. So if I come over here again and click that, now I've got the individual landmark, Eiffel Tower 3. But if we go back to landmarks, I want to click that. I want it to take me to the bean. So this is where that named route in views come in, right here. So I can hard code this by going to slash landmarks slash what is it? Landmark ID. I can do something like that. I believe that might work. So if I refresh that, click there, it takes me to landmark ID. But what if I decide to change my URLs at some point? I'd have to go, so maybe I want to change the actual URL that this takes me to. If I did that, then I'd have to come into here, look for every hard-coded landmark, wherever this is pointing to. I'd have to change all these and update these URLs. Or I can...
That makes sense.
Yep. So now I can use a named route. So by saying URL, what's the name of that route? Landmark underscore detail. I'm going to use double brackets like there, just so it's easier to read. So a URL named landmark detail, and pass in the landmark ID into that URL pattern. So this will, when I click on this, it'll, hey, look for a named route called landmark detail. Great, there, here it is, the name landmark detail, and pass this landmark ID as the parameter in the URL.
That makes so much more sense now.
All right, so if I go back and refresh that, it should still work. There we go. Cool.
Hey, Tom,
Question.
quick question.
Yep.
Let's say if you want to add a description for each one, how would you go about that?
Like a description for each landmark.
Yes.
I'd have to update my models and add a description here and rerun, make migrations, migrate, and then just add into my HTML file, just do like landmark description, like so. That help answer your question?
Kind of, because I was just trying to think, because obviously each landmark is different. So, like, where would you like put the information? I guess will be in the like. Do you have to make a separate model for the description themselves, or?
Nope. So a description is associated with an individual landmark. So you'd have that on in the same model. So landmark description is where it would go.
Okay, I'm probably thinking about like HTML. So like on the I guess the actual HTML page, that's where you write the actual description of it.
Like right here. So you'd store the description in the database.
Mhm.
Like so. And then you'd have access to that description in the HTML, like so.
Okay, gotcha.
That way you're not hard coding it.
Yep. All right. So this is all the Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco. All right. So now this app, it works. However, the whole point of the lecture is third-party APIs. Let's go ahead and utilize the Google Maps API, because this is it's just ugly. It's like, what the hell? This doesn't do anything for us. So we can actually utilize the Google Maps API, embed API. So I mentioned before, Google Maps has really good documentation, and they have a bunch of APIs for a bunch of stuff. But we specifically want to use the Google Maps embed API because it's easiest to use. We don't have to worry about it's free to use as well. You don't have to worry about connecting a credit card or anything like that. So when I clicked in our lecture material today, if I click on the Google Maps, it takes me straight to here. And if we just come down here to the Google Maps embed API, if I click on that, let's see where it takes us. It gives us a quick, easy way of how this kind of works. So over here, we have the overview and a little quick example of how the API, Maps API works. So here is an example. Here's the code that we require for this map to show up. So if you look at it, it uses an HTML tag called an iframe, and it has some attributes. But notice down here, it has a source and it has a link to what is actually being displayed. So googlemaps.com, I'm sorry, google.com/map/embed version 1, place, question mark, a key. And then here's where we get our API key. And we'll kind of cover what an API key is here in a second. But this is really all you need to do is import this somewhere in our code. So if I come over here and in my landmark detail, throw that in there, I can essentially have the show that the Space Needle. But we need to get an API key first. And the whole point is once we have an API key, we can put our API key in here or something like that. Or instead of hard coding the address, we put the address in here and we can make it dynamic. So let's just kind of go through and see how we actually get an API key. So getting started, use an automated iframe generator to embed maps into your web page. So let's click on this Get Start. It takes me to the Quick Start over here on the left-hand side. So the first thing we need to do is create a project or select a project that we're going to use. So in the Google Cloud Console, on the project selector, click Create Project. So I'm going to click that, open that in the Google Cloud Platform. It's loading. Here are my existing projects, but let's go ahead and create a project. So I'm just going to call it Oscar Platoon Landmarks. I'm going to create that. All right, it's creating that. So I've got some other example projects, and they updated this to make it really easy. It was a lot less intuitive before. So it's creating a project. And up here on the upper left-hand corner, right next to where it says Google Cloud Platform, this is what project you're currently selected as. So it's like, okay, there's all this information. It's a little intimidating. But let's just go back to right here. So step one, we created a project. It says make sure, I don't think that's really off. You're not going to be charged for this anyway. So next it says enable APIs or software developer kits. So now we actually have to enable our Oscar Platoon landmarks to utilize the Google Maps Embed API. So let me just click on this. I open it up into a new screen. All right, it took me to the Maps Embedded API, which we want to use, and I'm going to enable that now. And now this is all to get an API key for the Google Maps Embed API. So it has all this information, additional APIs right here, but here's our enabled APIs. We have Google Maps, or Maps Embed API. But let's just click through and follow the instructions. So we enabled the API, the Maps Embed API. Now let's click Get an API key. So go to the credentials page, which is essentially the same page I was just on. So if I went to Overview, I think that's where it was at, APIs. So this is where I was at before. If I go to the credentials right there, let's see where it says. I can say create. Let's actually just read this. On the credentials page, click Create Credentials API Key. So create credentials API key. So here's my API key for the Google Maps Embed API. And notice it's right here as well. This is a public API, which means anybody can see it, and that is okay. So if I come back here to my code base, and I just literally copy that, let's actually go back. And I place my API key in there, like so. And come over here and refresh this. Notice how I get a Google Maps API, or a Google map of the Seattle Space Needle. And now I can scroll and do stuff with it. What questions do you have up until this point?
Where did you go to? Oh, go ahead.
Were you signed in on the Google platform at all, or are you just there as a guest?
I was signed in as my personal Gmail account. It's up here. It looks like I'm already logged in.
Should we be cautious with API keys in our projects if we're like pushing them up to Git and stuff? Or
I would say yes, but your public API keys, honestly, no one's going to steal a free public API key from you. If it is a secret key, yes, don't push those up. And we'll get into like secret keys here in a second after we go through this tutorial.
Tom, I got a question.
Yep.
Are there any APIs that you know that may have potentially like compatibility issues as far as like utilizing them?
When you say compatibility issues,
just like embedding it into your program itself, like, you know, if it's actually functional, like, is there a way for us to kind of troubleshoot that so like we don't embed an API and then get all kinds of errors and have to debug and kind of backtrack that way?
Not that I don't know of any like specific APIs that are like broken that would throw errors on like because of the API, but there are certainly like API software developer kits that aren't written for Python or JavaScript. So you'd have to somehow like learn a new language, but yeah, not that I know of. No.
Okay.
Tom, after you ended up naming your project, where did you go to, I guess, get the embed button or whatever it was?
So I just followed here. I created a project. I went back here. I enabled the Maps Embed API. Once I enabled that, I came here to get an API key. Are you talking about how did I get an API key?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It's
yep.
A bunch of stuff opened up I couldn't follow on the
yeah. So platform. Over here in whatever project you're on, if you come over here, you can see APIs, what APIs you're currently utilizing. And then you come down here to credentials and then say create credentials and click API key, and it'll automatically generate an API key for you.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep, no problem. All right. Let's keep going. All right. So now that I have an API, or I'm utilizing the Google Maps Embed API, if I go back, there we go. It keeps taking me to the Space Needle, which I don't want. I want it to show the Chicago Bean here. So with that, there's a couple ways I can do that. I can, inside of, where's my views? Where I'm passing in the address. So inside my views, I have access to the address right here. So if I like print landmark.address and what is happening here? Start that server real quick. Oh, what the hell? Why is that port already in use? Oh, there we go. Whoops. So if I refresh this, I come down here, I can see I have the address right here. So now I just have to kind of see how to format that address. So if I come over here just to look at the quick start again, how it's used, like here's an example, it's space, like plus, like wherever there's a space, it looks like there's a plus. That's one way to do it. Let's see if there's anything else. Embed a map. All right. Okay. So it's got some parameters. So, okay, cool. So let's just say in place of, where's my landmark detail page? So instead of Seattle Space Needle right here, I want it to just be an address right there. So I've got landmark address, and I also just want to pass in an address. I could pass it in the landmark address, but I need to format it first. So I need to add like pluses in between these spaces right here. So in my views, I'm going to create a new.
If it's an actual address, you need pluses. Isn't that more for the search for a place name?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
If you have an actual address, do you need pluses? Because I think the pluses would be when it's doing a search for a landmark name. I'm
going off of how the right here, So space plus needle plus Washington. So this is the format that this address needs to be in for this to render correctly. So that's what I'm going off of. So down here, I'm going to create another method it's called generate Google address that takes in an address. So it's going to take in my landmark address and it's going to format it and it's going to return something it's going to return the modified address. So modified address equals, and I want to replace all the spaces in my address with plus signs. If I wanted to do that, does anybody know how I replace spaces with pluses?
You could do just straight string dot replace and then space, comma, quotes again, plus.
Yep. So replace plus or replace
a space with whatever you put there.
Yep. So like so. And I want to return the modified address. And I can test this out. Let's come up here. Let's run modified address equals. I'm going to call generate Google address and pass in the landmark address in there. Does anybody
address have to be above that landmark detail? Because I don't think Python does hoisting, does it?
But we can test it out. If it doesn't work, we can definitely hoist it to the top. Does anybody know why I put a underscore before I named this method?
Django does something with those underscore methods. Like it's got some kind of weird functionality that you fire off when you use an underscore on the lead of a method.
Does it? I actually don't know. Does
is that like best practice syntax for like a constant? Like does it let somebody know that it's supposed to be a constant or no?
So the reason why I put this underscore in front of this method is to signify for other developers that say this method is only used within this file. That's pretty much it. It's essentially kind of a helper method. But let's see, I'm going to print the modified address here and see if this prints it. So I'm going to come back here, refresh that. Invalid request, queue parameter. Did I change something in my, right here, looks like it's not working, but it should still have printed off down here in the console. So notice how it's 201 plus East plus Randolph plus Street plus Chicago, Illinois. So it looks like that's working, but now I just have to pass in that modified address into, so that's being here. So I'm returning this Google address, I'm returning it, and I'm assigning it to another variable. I'll just call it Google Maps address. And out here in my data, I'm just going to call it Google Maps address again. Google Maps address. So now in my landmark detail page, I've got access to the landmark as well as the Google Maps address in here. So let's just see if this works now. So if I refresh that, look at that. Now took me to the Google Maps, or it took me to the Chicago Bean. If I click back, Eiffel Tower, got the Eiffel Tower, Golden Gate Bridge. Yeah, cool.
Temporary closed.
So
Eiffel Tower is closed.
What's that?
It said the Eiffel Tower is closed.
Yep, looks like it's temporarily closed due to COVID.
That's what the map says.
Yep.
That's necessarily true.
You should call first.
Yeah. So let's take a look at also like what other. So right here. So So it looks like you can do other things with the Google Maps. I'm just going to look at more documentation, embed a map. So it looks like we have map mode as well. So we can add a map mode parameter. So if I click on map mode, where'd it go? So choosing the right map. So here are the different parameters we can add. So map type, maybe I want a satellite in there. So I can embed, place, let's look at that. Key, just add, where am I doing? Is it right here? Is it and map type, satellite? What was the name of that? I don't want to. So if I do and map type and refresh it, did I messed up the way it was supposed to take that? Is it question mark? Let's see. Oop. So V1 map mode. So it looks like I'll put that. Oh, what the hell? Did I need an extra thing like so? Nope. Let's see if that worked.
I wonder if it's the pluses rather than like the %20s. Because like how Google parses searches with plus.
Google refused to connect. Oh, that's always fun. Let's see. I think it's. All right. So I don't think I needed the. Okay.
Hey, Tom, what's the place question mark? Was there a Q needed there or something?
No, I don't think so. Let's see. Okay, that works right there. And do I do a and map type there? There we go. So yeah, that's another thing with regards to APIs is that you have to make sure that when you're talking to it, it's like they have very specific rules when talking to the Google Maps Embed API. So I've got map type satellite. What else? There's plays, view, street. So I've got zoom as well. So I can do zoom. So, and zoom equals, if you look at zoom ranging from 0 to 21, I can see the whole world at 0. Let's just do 1. Let's see how zoomed out that looks. All right, there we go. Or I can zoom in to, 15. And there, it's a little zoomed out with that. All right. So what questions do you have about utilizing the Google Maps Embed API and third-party APIs? This is a very unique one because it literally just uses an iframe to display something. But we'll show you another way to actually get additional information from other APIs.
What is an iframe anyway?
It's literally just an HTML tag.
It's generally used for like interactive content. You'll see it as like a box that holds like YouTube players or like audio players and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can use it for like embedding podcasts, videos, all kinds of stuff like that.
Yep. Cool. All right. So I'm going to. Does anybody have any other questions before I stop the recording and jump into another type of or just kind of show you an example of grabbing data from another API?